Hi, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the Share Series Monday Management Update. I'm Kristen Kluska, Managing Director of Biotechnology Equity Research at Cantor Fitzgerald. And this morning, I have the pleasure of speaking with George Lasezkay, President and CEO of Clearside Biomedical. George, thanks so much for the discussion. I'm looking forward to it today.
I'd be more than happy to go through and give you a very quick overview of Clearside. Drew, if you could pull up the slides, I appreciate it. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please, Drew. We'll be making some forward-looking statements during this presentation, so we need to put up our obligatory forward statement slide. Clearside Biomedical was built around our revolutionary drug delivery to the back of the eye, drug delivery into the suprachoroidal space. We've pioneered this unique mode of administration since 2012. We've developed a very robust intellectual property portfolio. So it's our proprietary suprachoroidal injection technology with a very robust portfolio of intellectual property. This kind of shows you kind of chronological order how the company developed. Next, we were able to put in place 4 validating external collaborations with other companies who shared our view that delivering drugs to the suprachoroidal space would be beneficial. Then we got our first product approved, product XIPERE, for the treatment of uveitic macular edema. That was approved in 2021. And then we moved on to our second product in our pipeline, CLSAX, which is axitinib, a tyrosine kinase inhibitor. We recently completed a phase 1/2A study named OASIS in wet AMD, where we were able to demonstrate significant reduction in treatment burden and an excellent safety profile. Recently, we announced the initiation of our phase 2B trial with CLSAX in wet AMD called Odyssey. And this morning, we announced that we are currently enrolling multiple participants in that trial, and we've begun the randomization of CLSAX versus our control drug has been initiated. Next slide, please. So what are the advantages of the suprachoroidal space? There are 3. Targeted for efficacy, we're putting the drug right where it needs to be, behind the visual field, next to the retina. We're going after treatment of retinal diseases, so we're putting it right where the drug needs to be. We're not putting it in the anterior space, we're not administering it systemically, and we're not administering it topically. Secondly, it's compartmentalized in this space. Once the drug is put into that space, it stays in that space. This keeps it away from non-disease tissues, preventing or minimizing any anterior toxicities or systemic toxicities. And it keeps the drug particles behind the visual field. This is very important, that there is no possibility for floaters, for haze, for any cloudiness in the vitreous that could impair vision that's already impaired. And thirdly, by keeping the drug in that space and compartmentalizing it there, we have shown that it produces prolonged activity in the eye. It remains extraordinarily bioavailable. The drug spreads posteriorly and circumferentially, gets all the way to the macula. So it has great distribution inside the eye, stays in the space, and it's in contact with the targeted disease tissues. Next slide, please. Here's a visualization of the suprachoroidal injection. You can see in the teal color, that is the suprachoroidal space. The drug is injected. The needle passes through the sclera into the suprachoroidal space. And with pressure gradients, the drug is administered and goes circumferentially and posteriorly around in the back of the eye, in contact with the choroid and behind the retina. This suprachoroidal injection procedure has been commercially accepted by retinal physicians following the launch of XIPERE by Bausch & Lomb in 2022. More than 1,000 retinal and uveitic physicians have been trained on the injection technique, and we've had thousands of suprachoroidal injections performed clinically, both with the commercial product and in clinical trials. The safety profile has been wonderful. There's been no significant or serious adverse events. No suprachoroidal hemorrhage, no endophthalmitis have been observed. It's been remarkably safe. So currently there are 6 suprachoroidal clinical trials that are ongoing, including our collaboration programs, delivering 4 potential therapies in 5 different indications. So it's really a remarkable and a versatile injection technology, and we're very proud of that. Next slide. As I mentioned at the beginning, we pioneered this space, and so we've built a robust intellectual property portfolio with 26 US and over 70 European and international issued patents, and multiple patents still pending. We've got patents that cover the manufacture of the device, various design features of the device, the way to use the device clinically have all been patented. We've patented the combination of the device administering various drugs into the suprachoroidal space. And we've also have patents that cover treatment of disease, particular posterior ocular disorders by suprachoroidal administration of therapeutic entities. So we're very proud of this. We continue to work and expand this portfolio. Next slide. As I mentioned again, multiple validating partnerships really were the beginning of our company. For Bausch & Lomb and Arctic Vision, we partnered XIPERE with them. Not only did it validate external companies believing in the suprachoroidal delivery path, but it also gave us the way to maximize the commercial potential of XIPERE in multiple geographic markets. Bausch & Lomb has the North American market currently, and Arctic Vision has mainland China and most of Southeast Asia, including Australia and New Zealand. The validating partnerships with REGENXBIO and Aura allowed us to expand our product development pipeline to broader uses, including ocular gene therapy and ocular cancer, 2 areas where we did not have the expertise to develop the products ourselves, but we did have the expertise using the suprachoroidal injector to deliver their therapeutic entities. And in both cases, they've seen remarkable receptivity by physicians and very good clinical results, and in particular, very good safety results in both cases. And finally, the validating partnerships provided an important source of non-dilutive funding to Clearside. Next slide. As I mentioned, XIPERE was the first product that was approved for suprachoroidal therapy, the first product approved that was a Clearside product, and the first product ever approved for the specific indication of uveitic macular edema. So we're very proud of XIPERE as our lead asset in the company, and we believe with Bausch & Lomb and Arctic Vision's help, we'll be able to have this product taken to patients around the world. Next slide. This is shows you our pipeline of clinical programs. I'm going to talk about the CLSAX program in a minute, but this summarizes our partnerships with REGENXBIO. You can see that they're now partnered with AbbVie to deliver their AAV-based gene therapy for 2 indications, wet AMD, diabetic retinopathy, and Aura Biosciences delivering their viral-like drug conjugate for choroidal melanoma. And as I've mentioned, Bausch & Lomb and Arctic Vision taking their products, XIPERE, into the commercial realm. Bausch & Lomb already in the United States is doing a regulatory submission for Canada. Arctic Vision recently did a submission in Australia to get approval there, and is in the closing stages of completing its phase 3 clinical trial for uveitic macular edema in the mainland China. Next slide. So this is our current lead development program, CLSAX or axitinib for wet AMD. It has a new mechanism of action with the potential for a longer duration of effect. Next slide. Age-related macular degeneration is a large and growing market. There's always been news recently with the approval of Vabysmo And Eylea has been the gold standard there for many years. Eylea is selling at $6 billion annual run rate. Vabysmo has recently been introduced in 2022 and is already at a run rate of over $1.5 billion a year, on its way to $2 billion, according to recent projections. So it's such a big market dominated by big players. Where's the opportunity? The opportunity for us is to produce a treatment that may have a longer duration of action and may address sub-responders to the current anti-VEGF-A treatment. Both Vabysmo and Eylea focus primarily on anti-VEGF-A. We believe that there's an opportunity with CLS-AX to provide a longer duration of activity and block more than just anti-VEGF-A, but other forms of VEGF that are in the eye. Next slide, please. So in our phase 1/2A trial, this is a summary of the data that was produced. Excellent safety data. No adverse events, no dose-limiting toxicities, no signs of any inflammation, and no signs of increased intraocular pressure. Importantly, in the durability, when we went to our extension study, which took a number of the patients out to 6 months, those in the high dose categories of cohorts 3 and 4, we saw greater than 4 months, 83% went greater or equal to 4 months before requiring any additional therapy. And interesting and very important to the company, greater than or equal to 6 months, we had 67% of the patients make it that far, and half the patients did not require treatment at the end of 6 months. So we think that we have a great potential to have significantly more duration of activity and reduced treatment burden. Importantly, during that period of time, the best corrected visual acuity remained stable. The central subfield thickness, which is a measure of the thickness of the retina at the important points along the retina, also remained stable. So what was the next step? Based on this encouraging data, we initiated a phase 2B clinical trial earlier this year in June. And the top line results from that will be available Q3 of next year. Next slide. So here's the Odyssey phase 2B trial that I've talked about. We have 60 participants, which is very much in line with recent phase 2 trials in wet AMD. It'll run for 9 months or 36 weeks, and it's been recently revised in its design to be consistent with recent FDA draft guidance for treatment for clinical trials in wet AMD. The objectives that we believe of this will be effective, and if we're doing this efficiently and effectively to produce top-line results in Q3 of 2024 that will allow us to design a phase 3 clinical trial program. As I mentioned before about the safety, efficacy, and duration, CLS-AX has the potential to be a 2 to 3 times a year maintenance drug. If you look at the current standards of care, Lucentis, Eylea, and the new entrant, Vabysmo, these are all, Lucentis, its on-label is once a month. Eylea, currently on-label, is every 2 months. And Vabysmo, on-label, is anywhere between 1 and 4 months in its maintenance dosing regimen. So we believe that if we have a drug that is 4 to 6 months consistently, we have an interesting new entrant in the wet AMD treatment regimen. We will be comparing ourselves to Eylea as our current standard of care for our comparator drug. And this, as I mentioned, is intended on completion of Odyssey to position us well for phase 3 to conform with the FDA draft guidelines. And I look forward to a phase 3 program that not only would do further comparisons to aflibercept, but could possibly include in the future a comparator to Vabysmo as well. These are the two most interesting and most used drugs currently, and we think we could stack up very nicely against them if Odyssey produces the results that we are hoping for. Next slide. So what are the upcoming catalysts for the company? As I mentioned, Q3 next year, very important top-line data, phase 2B top-line data in wet AMD. We continue to be active in all the scientific and medical meetings during the year. We'll have presentations at the major ones of Angiogenesis, Macular Society. We've already done those. We've already done ARVO. We will be at ASRS at the end of this month and at AAO in September and the Retina Society in October. Partnering programs, Bausch & Lomb continues to train physicians and market XIPERE in the US. They'll make submission for regulatory approval in Canada. Arctic Vision will continue on its phase 3 UME trial in China. They also have a phase 1 diabetic macular edema trial data that they will be revealing shortly, and hopefully progressing on to a phase 2 study in DME as well. As I mentioned, they've recently done a submission and it's been accepted in Australia for XIPERE, which they call Arcadis. REGENXBIO and Aura Biosciences have important information from their current studies that we are hoping they'll be positive, and we'll see that before the end of this year. So that gives you an overview to the company, what we're based on, what we've done, how we've pioneered an approach to the suprachoroidal delivery, a unique way of delivering drugs to the back of the eye that we think not only is safer, but we think it will potentially provide for a better way to deliver drugs to the back of the eye to treat life-threatening or sight-threatening retinal disorders. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Kristen.
George, thank you so much for that kind of overview. Maybe first we can talk a little bit more about the subchoroidal delivery technology. You did highlight the key advantages, but I think what would be interesting to learn here is some of the early feedback that you're getting from the market with the XIPERE experience. I guess, what are you seeing in terms of training and physician acceptance of this procedure?
The training and most Bausch & Lomb has done the majority of the training, although we've trained injectors in the REGENX study. We've trained injectors for Aura in their studies as well. And actually, we did virtual training for Arctic in China during the pandemic, which was an interesting little challenge for us that we overcame. But what we're seeing principally from feedback through Bausch & Lomb is the acceptance, the willingness to be trained is great. Every time they offer training, it's oversubscribed. There's more physicians lining up to be trained. The training does not take very long, but it's very important. It's simple, but again, I'll emphasize it's very important. A couple of practice injections and any experienced retinal physician will understand exactly how to do the injections. There's two main components. One, it has to be perpendicular to the orb, and two, it has to go in over about 5 or 7 seconds. And what we have to do is a little bit of unteaching, because they're so used to doing intravitreal injections, they can come in at any angle and they can just bolus it right in. So we just have to tell them perpendicular, 5 to 7 seconds, and then they get it. And the training response has been great. Patient or physicians that know how to do it find it easy. I even talked to my retinal physician. He participates in the REGENX trial, and he said, yeah, it's easy to learn, but you just have to remember those two things. So training is essential, but it's simple, and it's been well received.
Okay. And we had a question from the audience asking what the plans are for XIPERE in Europe.
Well, we're having conversations. We do have conversations from time to time about Europe, and but we don't have any immediate plans to partner it in Europe as of yet. So we look into that. We're not unmindful of the opportunity in Europe, but we have to find the right partnership there that makes sense for us and under terms that make sense for the partner. So we consider that, we look into it. We haven't forgotten about it, but right now it's not let's say it's not happening just yet. Just leave it at that.
Okay, and maybe to talk about wet AMD a bit more, what do you view as the typical patient experience right now with standard of care, and essentially what the key unmet needs you're potentially looking to fulfill?
Well, to be honest, a product like Eylea does a very good job for the newly diagnosed patients. You know, they come in and they have some neovascularization in the back of the eye. That's diagnosed. Yet it's almost always because of excess circulating VEGF. And the initial administration of Eylea works works pretty well. Very safe, works very well. What happens over time is some patients don't respond well over time, and they become what we call subresponders, or they need to be injected constantly. So instead of every 2 months, they have to be injected every month, and they're not getting all the response that they initially saw when they were first diagnosed. So there is this somewhat of a resistant group of patients over time. And there's a lot of reasons why that might be. One of the reasons we think we have an advantage with CLS-AX is that it blocks all the VEGF receptors. It is not specific for VEGF-A. And in the cases where VEGF-A is being bound up by things like products like Eylea, there tends to be an overexpression of other VEGFs like C and E. And we block the receptors for all of them. So that's why I mentioned in the overview that I think with a different mechanism of action, a second mechanism of action, I think we have a place, ultimately, potentially have a place in the treatment of wet AMD especially for those patients that have a subresponse, become resistant. And the other part of the patient experience is, like I mentioned with Lucentis, so many patients require monthly visits to the retinal physician to get their injection. With Eylea, that's usually a 2-month trip to the physician. We're trying to get to the point where it's twice a year trip to the physician. It's a reduced treatment burden on the patient, and it's a reduced cost to the system. So we think there's an opportunity there from treating people who have resistance or a subresponse, and for all patients on a maintenance therapy, we think we give them a reduced, we think there's a potential for a reduced treatment burden.
Thank you. And then
Sure.
You alluded this morning that you had some progress ongoing in the trial. So maybe, help us to understand what you would view as a positive outcome in your opinion, and assuming that you do get the data you want to see, what are the next steps for the company towards an FDA approval?
Sure. I hate to be too predictive of what success looks like, but to me, I've mentioned where Eylea is looking at every 2 months. That's the standard of care. And I mentioned Vabysmo as the new kid on the block, and their label is after 4 loading doses, either between 1 and 4 months maintenance. We're looking at least 4 to 6 months of maintenance. And I think in the current trial, if I could pencil in the data that I wanted, I would like all my patients to go participants to go 6 months. But I think if we get it, and the vast majority are 5 to 6 months after the aflibercept loading dose, I think that's success. That we're showing that after you use the VEGF-A load, the pan-VEGF blockade drug of CLS-AX, the tyrosine kinase inhibitors, are going to give you 5 to 6 months of therapeutic effect without requiring additional treatment. I think that would be a big step forward. I mean, I'm even looking at what high-dose Eylea, when they eventually come around to resubmit, and they had their little problems, early on, but they were still looking at between 3 and 4 months. After quadrupling their dose, they could not consistently double their therapeutic, the length of their therapeutic effect. If I can have CLS-AX in the dose that we're using in Odyssey, after their loading dose, go 5 to 6 months, I think I've got a very good maintenance drug that'll find a place because of its mechanism and because of its duration. I think it'll have a nice place in the overall group of drugs that treat wet AMD.
Okay, and if that scenario happens, and if you like the data, what are essentially the next steps for the company at that stage towards FDA approval?
Well, the next, as that data is coming in, we'll be laying out a plan for a phase 3 program. on the assumption that that would be 2 phase 3 trials. And those 2 phase 3 trials would be expensive. So there'll be a choice for the company to make at that point in time of, can we finance those trials ourselves? I'm sure we can design and set up those trials. I'm sure we could conduct those trials. The question is, can we finance those trials? So I think there'd be, we'll prepare for phase 3, but I think the company will be in a position where we are likely to be looking for some partnering assistance at that point in time. Whether it's the entire world or it's part of the world, I think we'll have to deal with that at the time. But I could see where certainly a scenario where we might be able to partner the world, keep the US. That's certainly a possibility for us, but we'll have to make those decisions. And the decisions will be guided by a number of factors, not the least of which would be the strength of the data that comes out of Odyssey.
Okay, great. Thanks. We'll really appreciate you answering all of my questions in your overview. So in the last few minutes here, I really just wanted to open the floor to you. See if you could please summarize any key value drivers for the company and any other comments that you wanted to make.
Sure. Well, obviously, the most important value driver for us is the successful enrollment and completion of Odyssey with the kind of data that we just talked about, and that will be Q3 of next year. You know, when that data, that's the most important thing. But I'd also say that looking at some of our partnerships, there's some very key data coming out, especially out of the Regenxbio partnership later this year. I think they've been able to show using ocular gene therapy that the suprachoroidal has really given them an alternative to a much more invasive subretinal approach to their therapy. And I think positive data out of them would be a really important value driver for us. It keeps all of our partners, as they produce their data and show positive data, which I'm very much hoping they do, really validates all the work that's been done in this company since 2012 on validating and showing the benefits of suprachoroidal injection. So I think those are really it for me in the near term. I think also Australian approval for Arctic Vision would be great, and successful completion of Arctic Vision's phase 3 with good data in China would also be a big boost for the company.
Great, thanks everybody. Really appreciate everybody tuning into the Share series. The next event is going to be on August 14th. And with that, thank you again and hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you, Kristen.